I imagined I had it all: love, security, a perfect life. But in one reckless moment, I threw it all away. Now, I'm left with a secret I can never undo, and a desire I can't escape. Was it worth it? I thought I had everything figured out: love, stability, a life built on promises and trust. But sometimes, the hardest part isn't knowing what you want. It's knowing what you're willing to risk to get it. One decision, one moment of weakness, and everything I thought I understood about myself shattered. Now, I wake up every day with a secret, a haunting temptation I can't seem to escape. The man I never intended to fall for crossed my path when I least expected it, and in an instant, my perfect world began to crumble. I thought I could handle it, control it. But what happens when desire outweighs loyalty? When passion blinds you to the consequences? I'm living with the aftermath, but the question lingers: was it worth it? Or did I lose everything for a moment that I can never get back? The moment we shared felt like the calm before the storm. Jake and I had been dancing around it for weeks, his presence, magnetic, pulling me in without a word. But that night, something shifted. The secluded cabin, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, framed by the endless expanse of the ocean, felt like the edge of the world. I had never been so close to a boundary I knew I was about to cross. The air was thick, charged with electricity, as if the universe had conspired for this moment. I tried to convince myself to leave, to step away before I lost myself entirely. But Jake didn't give me that choice. With a single glance, his eyes locked on mine, calm, steady, a promise in his gaze I couldn't ignore. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it held an authority that made my heart race. I didn't respond, but my body betrayed me. Every fiber of my being wanted to stay, wanted to see where this would lead. Jake moved closer, his touch deliberate, igniting something deep inside me. His hand brushed my arm, his fingers skimming lightly, sending an unexpected shiver down my spine. It was a touch that felt too familiar, too intimate, as if he had always known how to make me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. As I turned to face him, his lips found mine, slow, patient at first. But it wasn't long before the kiss deepened, a hunger rising between us that neither of us could control. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath shallow, my mind scrambling to make sense of the whirlwind I had willingly stepped into. Every kiss, every caress, felt like a promise, a pull I couldn't fight. But my thoughts were clouded by the way he made me feel: alive, desired, powerful. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was just playing a role. I wasn't someone's wife or a mother or a daughter. I was me. My hands moved to his chest, feeling the warmth of his body through his shirt, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed more. He was relentless, reading my every move, anticipating my next breath. He knew exactly what I wanted before I did, pushing me further than I ever imagined I could go. As the night wore on, it wasn't just physical, it was a complete unraveling. A rush of emotions, of desire, that drowned out every reason I had left. I had crossed a line, and in that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to return. I woke up the next morning to the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting a soft glow across the room. But nothing felt soft about what had happened. I lay still for a moment, listening to the waves crashing outside, but the sound only reminded me of the chaos swirling inside me. Jake was asleep beside me, his breathing steady, a look of calm satisfaction on his face. But I wasn't calm. I was restless. I was shattered. The silence between us felt heavier than any conversation we could have had. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I could feel the weight of the betrayal, pressing down on my chest. And yet, part of me felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I had forgotten what it felt like to be desired, not just for my role as a wife, but as a woman. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. The cool air of the morning hit me as I stood by the window, staring out at the ocean. My mind raced, thoughts of my husband, Mark, flooding my brain. He deserved better. But what about me? In that moment, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. There was a truth I couldn't escape. I had opened a door, and once it was open, there was no turning back. The days that followed felt like a tightrope walk. Mark was completely unaware, completely trusting. He kissed me every morning, held me every night, and I could almost convince myself that everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. The memory of Jake haunted me. His touch, his presence, his voice. Every time Mark touched me, I had to remind myself to feel something, to respond, but it wasn't the same. My body knew the difference. One evening, as we sat together, I caught myself zoning out, my mind replaying moments with Jake that I couldn't seem to forget. Mark noticed. "You okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I smiled, forcing the facade to stay in place. "Yeah, just tired." But the truth was, I wasn't tired. I was lost. In between the life I had built with Mark and the life Jake had awakened in me, I was somewhere in between, stuck between what I wanted and what I had. And I couldn't decide which one I was ready to let go of. Jake reached out again. At first, it was subtle, just a text, a quick message checking in. But it wasn't long before the messages grew more intense, more personal. He didn't just want a one-night thing. He wanted more. And as the days passed, I felt the pull growing stronger. But I couldn't give in again, could I? Every time I resisted, I felt a piece of myself slipping away. And when I saw him again, unexpectedly, my body didn't even hesitate. I was already lost, and I knew it. The weight of the secret had been suffocating, but now, it felt like a ticking time bomb. Every day, the guilt gnawed at Lana, wearing her thin. She no longer had the luxury of pretending everything was fine. Each touch from Mark, every kiss, felt hollow, a cruel reminder of the choice she had made. Mark, loving as ever, remained blissfully unaware, but she could no longer ignore the distance she had created between them. The woman he loved no longer existed, replaced by someone who felt lost and unrecognizable. It was in the quiet moments, the stillness of the night as they lay side by side, that she realized it wasn't just the affair that had changed her. It was everything. She had become someone who could never be truly honest with the man who trusted her most. The tipping point came that morning, when she found herself at the kitchen counter, hands shaking as she stared at the text message from Jake. It was simple: "I haven't forgotten about you." Lana's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, everything else in the world faded away. She felt the pull to Jake all over again, the seductive promise of passion, the escape from the life she was now suffocating in. She could almost hear his voice, feel the heat of his touch, and in that moment, her loyalty to Mark seemed to waver. This wasn't just about desire, it was about feeling alive again, something she hadn't felt in years. But as she hovered over her phone, ready to respond, reality slammed back into her chest. She couldn't live like this anymore. She couldn't continue tearing herself apart, living two lives, both hollow and unsatisfying. Lana couldn't run anymore. Mark had been quieter than usual, his gaze searching, as if he knew something was off. It had been a slow unraveling, and now, with her fingers trembling in her lap, Mark finally asked the question that had been hanging between them for weeks. "Lana, is there something you need to tell me?" His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even suspicious, it was filled with hurt, the kind of hurt that only someone who truly loves you can give. His eyes searched hers, and in that moment, Lana knew this was the last time she could lie. The truth would either save or destroy them. The words escaped her lips in a rush. "I've been with someone else." Her voice cracked, but there was no turning back. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face, once filled with warmth and security, now crumbled into disbelief. It wasn't just the act that hurt him, it was the betrayal of the trust that had been the foundation of their entire relationship. His silence tore through Lana, more painful than anything Jake had ever made her feel. For the first time, she wished she could disappear. The days after the confession were a blur of emotions, anger, disbelief, and, most painfully, heartbreak. Mark didn't yell. He didn't scream. Instead, he withdrew. There was a silence between them now, a chasm that couldn't be bridged by apologies. Every word of regret Lana spoke only deepened the distance. He loved her, but he could never look at her the same way again. And she could never unsee the devastation in his eyes, the trust shattered by her actions. The affair had promised Lana something her marriage had long since lost: excitement, passion, a sense of being seen. But it had also torn her world apart. She realized now that she hadn't just betrayed Mark, she had betrayed herself. Jake had never promised her forever. In fact, he had made it clear from the beginning that he wanted nothing more than a fleeting moment. And now, Lana was left with the aftermath: no lover, no comfort, and no easy way to make it right. Lana sat alone, staring out the window, wondering if there was any way to rebuild what she had destroyed. Mark hadn't left, yet. He was still there, but there was no going back to what they had. She could see it in his eyes: the love was there, but the trust had died. She asked herself if the passion with Jake had been worth the destruction of everything else in her life. Could she ever fix the broken parts of herself that had led her to make that choice? As the days passed, Lana realized that this wasn't just about Mark or Jake anymore. It was about her. What kind of woman, what kind of person, did she want to be? She had made a choice, but now, she had to live with it. She knew that her path forward could be one of rebuilding, or walking away from everything, including the man who had loved her unconditionally. Lana knew that healing would take time, and perhaps, it might never happen. She couldn't undo the past, but she could try to move forward. Mark was still there, but their relationship would never be the same. It would be up to her whether they could rebuild together, or if their love had been permanently tarnished. The affair had taught Lana the hardest lesson of all: that desire, while powerful, cannot replace love. Passion might burn bright, but it fades, leaving ashes behind. What was left after the fire was not just the damage she had caused, but the person she had become, a woman who now understood the difference between lust and loyalty. And whether she and Mark could rebuild was a question she couldn't answer just yet. But one thing was clear: the woman she was before the affair would never return. As Lana sat in the quiet aftermath, she knew one truth above all: nothing in her life could ever be the same again. The question now was whether she could find a way to live with the consequences and rebuild what had been lost. Now, here's where we need your thoughts. Was Lana justified in seeking passion outside her marriage, or did she betray her vows beyond repair? Imagine being in her shoes. How would you handle the guilt, the temptation, and the fallout? I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Did she deserve a second chance, or was her choice unforgivable? If you found this story gripping and raw, don't just watch, be a part of the conversation. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of real stories that dive deep into love, betrayal, and the choices we all face. And while you're at it, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going. Your voice matters. Subscribe, comment, and let's unravel these stories together.